This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, Ryan. Can you hear me?
Good morning. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Ryan, our quorum will still be 6, even though Belton does not currently have a voting member.
Okay. Thank you.
Good morning. If you just joined us as caller 2, could you please type your name into the chat box, as well as all other participants on the line? Please type your name into the box for attendance. Thank you.
Hello, Kendra and James. This is Tom Fowler with Kinley-Horn. I just wanted to make sure my microphone was working.
Hi, Tom. Yes, we do have you. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Kendra. I'll be presenting for the Text Out TSMO program later today, so thank you.
Alrighty. Thank you so much. Good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning. For record of attendance, if you could please type your name into the chat box and also mute your lines if you are not talking. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. We are awaiting 2 more members to have a full quorum, and we will be getting started at 9:30. If you see your name listed on the panel as a caller rather than identified by your name, please type your name into the chat box so that we can record your attendance. Thank you. Good one. We are still waiting on 2 for a quorum, but Brian, for the sake of time, we can go ahead and get started.
Okay, thank you, Kendra. If you see the 2 more pop-ups, then we will revisit some of the action items if we need to. But like Kendra said, for the sake of time, we have a pretty packed agenda. I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order, and then open the floor opportunity for public comment. And I'm not aware of anybody that's wanting to speak. So seeing that, we will move to agenda item 3, which is staff update. Kendra?
Yes, listed on the screen are the meetings for the upcoming months of October, November, and December. November and December, at this time, we do plan to meet in person. If that changes, we will notify you by email. The Transportation Planning Policy Board has elected new officers for FY21. Mayor Jose Sequeira will serve as chair, and Mayor Brady Diaz will serve as vice chair. The call for projects is now open as of October 1st, and that call will run through November 13th. For more information, you may visit the KTMPO website. We have a tab for the call for projects with frequently asked questions, the submission packet, as well as the application forms. More questions that are to be answered may be submitted to James McGill through October 30th. That is the deadline for the remaining questions for the submission of projects. And then our item D is a reminder that October 2020 is National Walk to School Month, and October 7th, which is today, is National Walk to School Day. Air quality for the month of September was 51 parts per billion at the Temple station, as well as 51 parts per billion at the Killeen station. You're Ryan, that is all.
Are there any questions for Kendra? I'm not seeing any or hearing any. With that, we'll actually skip agenda item 4, which is the approval of the minutes until we do have a quorum, and move into agenda item 5, which is a discussion and action item. We can only do the discussion portion right now, unless you think it'd be beneficial, Kendra, that we actually go down to the presentations, because those discussion and action items
I think
really go
so.
hand in hand.
That's right.
Okay. With that, we will skip items 4, 5, 6, and 7, which are all action items, and waiting for a quorum. And we will move to agenda item 8, which is a discussion item. We have representatives from TxDOT on the line to update on the pilot travel surveys for the KTMPO region. And with that, I will transfer it over to TxDOT.
Hello, I'm Ed Hard with TTI, and I'm here today with Christine Push with TxDOT's Transportation Planning and Programming Division. And we just wanted to give you a brief update on the surveys that will be taking place this fall within the Killeen-Temple MPO area and how those fit within the TxDOT Travel Survey Program. And if we can go down to the second slide, please. Just to show you that overall the data that's being collected is really the building blocks of the model in the beginning of the planning process. You see this is the way to collect local data with the local metrics that are needed within the travel demand model, which of course is in use in the planning process there in Killeen-Temple. So that's where they fit into the overall process there. You see the very beginning. Next slide, please. And I don't need to show you your own Killeen-Temple MPO study area. Sorry, well, let me just talk about, these were not, seem to be out of order a little bit, but overall, just to let you know how these traveler surveys fit within the overall statewide survey program. The way that works is there is a statewide program, and TxDOT can't, it's difficult to study 23 MPOs within the state, and so what they've done as part of the program is consolidated the MPOs into 14 regions. And the way the program works is surveys are a comprehensive set of travel surveys to support models are conducted about every 10 years within the regions to make sure that all MPOs have up-to-date model data for their models. The surveys are conducted to coincide with when saturation counts are conducted within these regions because the counts are needed to be able to analyze the survey data. And now moving on to the next slide related to the study area there. Like I said, you don't need to be shown your own study area, but I just wanted to show you that the blue dots around the perimeter of the study area, those are what are called the external stations. And some of you may remember the old roadside surveys where we used to collect, or data used to be collected for travel going into and out of the study area. That's what those represent. And it's essentially, those are the points where data from travel that comes into and out of and through your area is taken into account to the model. And we'll talk about that later, but today we're using big data that's purchased, crowdsourcing data to be able to collect that travel information. And from there, I believe the next slide, I'm going to turn it over to Christine Push with TxDOT, and she's going to give you a little bit more detail about your surveys.
Thanks, Ed. So for the travel survey, we're trying to get information for all different types of travel. And so we have a few different types of travel surveys we do. We conduct a household survey, an establishment survey, which is composed of both a workplace component and a commercial vehicle component. And then we have the external studies that Ed touched upon just now. And then we analyze all of that data using the counts that TxDOT does. And so on to the next slide. For the household survey, we're looking at people's travel who live in the area. And so we ask them to track their travel for a day. The households are randomly selected based on their address. And previously, we only did surveys where we asked people to log all their travel on pen and paper, and then we would call them up, or the vendor would call them up and get their information. And you can kind of see a picture of the lady calling someone from the call center. Now we have allowed the vendor to use a variety of different instruments. And so for this survey, people will have the opportunity to download an app on their phone, and the app will automatically track travel. And then people can just confirm where they're traveling, or they can, if they don't feel comfortable downloading an app, they can fill out the survey online. So it allows for a variety of ways, makes it easier for people to participate. And so go on to the next slide. Yeah, and so this is, an example of the app. For the survey, we want to make sure we get travel, capture lots of different people's travel. So we found that travel can vary based on household size and income, and so we stratified the sample that way. For this survey, we're going to do 1,500 household surveys. And then I won't go into too much detail about these, but these key results are the key model inputs that we're looking for. All the surveys the data is collected for the travel demand models. You can go on to the next slide. So the establishment survey is composed of two different components. The one part is the workplace survey. And this is, again, we're trying to get lots of different, we want to make sure we have a representative sample, and we've sampled all different types of businesses. And so the sample is stratified by employment types, which are basic, retail, service, and education. We're going to be surveying about 300, or we are going to be surveying 300 workplaces, randomly selected, and then there's going to be 8 specially generated. For these surveys, you can kind of see in the pictures, part of it is our vendor will go out and interview people visiting different businesses and ask them about their travel to and from that site. They also conduct counts at all of these sites to figure out how many vehicles and or people come in and out that day. And then below, again, are the key model inputs that we're looking for. And you can go on to the next slide. The other component of the establishment survey, the workplaces we survey, they may participate in one or both of these. But for those businesses that have commercial vehicles, we ask them to participate in a survey that's a little bit like the household survey, in that we also get travelers to track their travel for a day. And like with the household survey, participants can use their app, they can use a web-based survey, or they can just track it by pen and paper and then talk to someone and share that information. Again, we're trying to make sure we get a lot of different businesses surveyed, and so we stratify the establishments by size and sector. We're also looking to get both information on cargo and service vehicles. And then we have the key model inputs that are listed right here. You can go on to the next slide. So this is the status right now of where we stand. So the vendor completed, ETC Institute, which is our vendor, they completed the survey this summer in July and August, and all the data has been accepted. We are just looking over all those instruments, making sure, and the procedures, making sure everything's in good shape. So we're hoping to finalize those sometime this month. And so then we can start surveying later this month or next month sometime. And hopefully the surveys will be completed by the end of the spring semester. For the workplace surveys, we currently do have that one on hold. That's the one survey that involves in-person interaction. The household and commercial vehicle do not. And so right now what we're doing is we're trying to explore ways to conduct that survey safely, but we are not moving forward with it quite yet. And then Ed's going to talk a little bit more, and he touched upon it earlier too, but we also completed a study of external data in 2018, and we purchased the 2015 data. And so we have that analysis completed. So with that, I'm going to move on to the next slide and turn it back over to Ed.
Thank you, Christine. Yeah, this slide just essentially shows you, we wanted to give you a perspective of the overall time period it takes to conduct these surveys. And I don't know if you can see on your screen, but we're at the point where I'm getting a lot of feedback. I hope y'all can hear me. But we're at the point where we're collecting data. We've been through all the processes of bidding and the pilot survey. We're actually now beginning the surveys, and then after that we'll be analyzing it. Just to show you where we're at. Next slide, please. We've mentioned the external study, and again, this is the study. It's basically the replacement of the old roadside surveys where we get collect data on traffic going into, out of, and through the study area. We've done that using crowdsourcing data, GPS data, and a new data called location-based services data, which is essentially data from cellular devices and also data from GPS, in-vehicle GPS navigational information. So what the big core diagram on the bottom right shows you is essentially the flow bands of travel between each of the external stations in the Killeen-Temple area. And we have a lot of documentation and more stuff like that to show you, to give you insights on travel flows within the area from traffic that's coming into and out of and through the area. Next slide, please. This is just the cover of the study that was completed. Christine mentioned that it was a 2018 study, but the reason we purchased 2015 data was to coincide with the traffic counts that were conducted in 2015. Those were the most recent counts. And so the way the program is working is with the next counts, potentially TxDOT could be buying new data to be able to update the external travel study to show you the flows. So these two graphics on the right-hand side, the flows of the EE trips, which are external to external, that's travel going through your study area, completely through, and the bandwidth of those lines shows you the facilities in which the majority of that is occurring. And the other one on the bottom right is just more of a density map of all the traffic that comes into and out of the area. Those are the trip ins. You know, the darker the color, the more the travel, or the more stops from people who came from inside or left the study area. If you can understand that, it's a little bit difficult to explain. Next slide, please. Just wanted to let you know that the overall survey effort, there will be quite a bit of good documentation for you. There will be reports from the vendor, reports from TTI showing the results of the analysis, and those will all be available to you. And they're also on TxDOT's website. There is a on their website, you can just Google TxDOT Travel Survey Reports, and they're not there yet. But the external report is there, but once they're complete, they'll be on the TxDOT website. Next slide, please. And with that, we don't have anything else, and Christine or I would be happy to answer any questions. Sorry if we went through that kind of fast. We know that you all have a heavy agenda today, so we're trying to make haste. Thank you.
Hey Ed, it's Christine. So I just wanted to add one thing we had talked about, and just that we are going to be trying to follow up with outreach. So we may be touching base with some of you guys about conducting some of that outreach, and that helps us let citizens know about the effort, confirm the legitimacy, and spread the word about the importance of the study. So it's really helpful for us to get that help from you guys, and we will, touch base. But yeah, I guess with that, we can leave it up to you guys for questions or move on. I don't know.
Thank you. Are there any questions for TxDOT? Seeing none, we do actually have a quorum now, so we can go back and do the action and discussion and action items. So with that, I will move back to agenda item 4, which is an action item regarding the approval of the minutes from the September 2nd meeting. I hope everybody had a chance to review those. If there are any questions or discussions, please let me know. If not, I will entertain a motion. I have a motion and a second from Joseph and a second from Robert Lewis. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? And that motion carries.
Here, Ryan, I do believe we may have lost connection with you.
Oh, I'm back. Okay, can everybody hear me? I hope so. We'll do this again.
Okay.
The agenda item 4 passed the minutes. So we'll move to agenda item 5, which is a discussion and action item regarding the recommendation of approval for amendments to the FY19-22 and FY21-24 Transportation Improvement Programs and the 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Program for Project W40-04A1, Loop 121, Phase A1, 1A. Kendra?
Yes, you're Ryan. This item was brought before the committee during the last month. It went out for public involvement with no comments received. The change for the amendment is regarding the limits and the costs, which are detailed there on the screen. And so today, with no comments received, we are requesting approval of the proposed amendments.
Thank you, Kendra. Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to recommend approval. I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. And all those opposed? And that motion carries. Thank you, everyone. We will move to agenda item 6, which is a discussion and action item regarding the recommendation to initiate public involvement to the FY19-22 and FY21-24 TIP and 2045 MCP for project W35-07 Northwest Loop 363 project and project W3501 US 190 bypass and project W30-23 US 190 Loop 363. Kendra?
Yes, so the first two projects mentioned, which is W3501 and W3507, both have a let date change as well as a removal from the TIP. Victor Goebel is with us and can give information on the constraint issues of these two projects in reference to our current TIP. Victor?
Good morning. Before I begin, can y'all hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good deal. So yeah, we briefly talked about this in last month's meeting, and I just kind of want to go through it again and make sure everybody understands what we're up against on this. And I'm just going to start off by talking about the history of the UTP. So leading up to 2018, for Cat 2, Cat 4, Cat 7, Cat 12, all those categories of funding, it's a 10-year allocation, but they were allocated by yearly allocations within that 10 years. For instance, for Category 2 funds, if you wanted to let a $20 million project, but you were only allocated $10 million a year, you would have to wait 2 years before you could go let that $20 million job. Basically, you'd bankroll that $10 million until you get $20 million. So in 2018, the UTP had changed, and the Category 2, Category 4, and Category 12 funding allocations became just one lump of funds on the 10-year amount. And TPP had encouraged all the MPOs to go ahead and fund your 10 years worth of allocations. And if y'all were within the MPO during that time, y'all remember when we, TxDOT, were coming to y'all pleading that we need to go ahead and get projects in the UTP. So what happened in 2018 to change this is when the Prop 1 and Prop 7 funds started hitting the bankrolls. And so TxDOT had a huge cash influx of extra funds that needed to get tied to projects in order to let. And so that's why they were encouraging all the MPOs to go ahead and get projects on the shelf, get them ready, let's start letting them and using up the cash that was starting to come into the system. So if you were at the 2018 planning conference, you probably even remember TxDOT leadership was up on the stage saying the same thing, is that program up, program up, program up. And so we did it really well in K-Tempo. We did it really well in Waco MPO, and every other MPO in the state did it really well also, except that without having some specific direction, all, or I won't say all, probably about 60 to 80% of the 10-year Cat 2 allocated funds were programmed within the first 4 years of the UTP. So right now, the UT or the STIP cycle, the first 4 years is 2021 through 2024. And so we are way over programmed statewide. And that's why they have come back now. And in the latest 2021 UTP that came out, we're going back to a yearly allocation, in that we'll have to bankroll money in order to let projects until we have enough bank balance to let them. So what we have right now for this MPO and the STIP, we have 4 projects. We have the Business 190 in Coppers Cove that let last month. We have the State Loop 121 in Belton. We have the Loop 363 Lucius McKelvey and Industrial Overpass project. And then we also have the US 190, the Coppers Cove Relief Route. So with all 4 of those, based on the new allocation that TPP had given us, we are $72.3 million over. And so based on, number one, the Business 190 already let, so that one has to stay. And then based on project priority, project readiness, our recommendation is to keep 121 in the STIP and push out the Coppers Cove Bypass project and the Loop 363 Lucius McKelvey and Industrial Overpass projects. Now saying that, the STIP cycle, we do this, we come back and redo a TIP every 2 years. So based on the new way the UTP is handled, K-Tempo, they're going to be getting new influx of Cat 2 funds each year as we go along. So the plan is in the next TIP cycle to try to bring these projects back in if they are still ranked where they are, and that's what the MPO wishes to get into. So again, we're not losing the money. We're just having to space out our funding over the 10 years versus trying to cram everything up into the first 4 years like we currently have it. So that's pretty much where we're at, and that was our recommendation, is to bump those projects out. Like on the amendment, like it says, we're going to have to put it into at least 2025. That's beyond the STIP. But then 2 years from now, when we come and take another look, we can probably bring it back into the next TIP. So hopefully we don't have to wait till 2025 to let it, or either one of them, or any others that might pop up to the top during that time. So again, we're not losing it. We're just having to push it out.
Thank you,
Any
Victor.
questions on? Okay, thank you.
And if there's no questions for Victor on those 2 projects, we have one more amendment that will be regarding the US 190 Loop 363 project W3023. This is simply an MTP amendment to amend the limits of this project from Spur 290 to SH 95 to revised as FM 1741 to FM 436 due to the extended limits being to cover the entire scope of the project. The cost of the project is unchanged. Here, Ryan, the schedule is up there on the screen that we plan to go out for public involvement in October, with the meeting dates listed as well, and then coming back in November for approval.
Thank you, Kendra. I will now open the floor for anybody who has questions or comments on this agenda item.
You're Ryan. This is Ryan Haverlaw.
Yes, sir.
So my question is for you, Victor, as far as pushing these projects out, and you stated that there's a hope of 2 years of possibly bringing these back in for funding sooner than 2025. Do you have any idea of the confidence level of possibly funding them sooner than 2025?
Yeah, I'm pretty confident. I don't know if both of them are going to be able to get funded before 2025. These changes that we're doing leaves us with a surplus of about 23 million of Cat 2 that's unallocated within this STIP cycle. And I don't have the UTP up in front of me. I'm wanting to say, I'm thinking for K-Tempo, it's somewhere around 10 million a year that our allocation, maybe even a little bit more than that. It kind of jumps around. I'd have to pull up the chart and look at it, but we'll get that 23 million of surplus that we have, plus the Business 190 that just let for about 5 million less than what we had had originally anticipated. I think it went around 5 million versus 10 million. So there's another 5 million. And then if we get 10 to 15 million a year in the allocations, then absolutely, I think we could definitely get one of these projects back in for sure before 2025, maybe even both. There's no telling. Something else that I'm pushing for, and that's why I tabled it last month, and I wanted to have a little bit more time to push on this, is that we're in a really good position right now in that we have these major projects pretty much ready to go. I mean, the plans, like the Coppersco bypass plans, I think those are almost to 60 or 95%. 121's done, and then the 363 stuff, I think that's about at the same level, 60 to 90% also. So we can use that hopefully to leverage against the state, because again, we have this cash influx of Prop 1 and Prop 7, and just because other MPOs get these allocations, if their plans aren't ready to go, if we have plans sitting on the shelf, we can come up and say, look, TPP, we've got these plans ready to go. This other MPO, they're not going to be able to use their money in time. Can we go ahead and let our stuff early, and then maybe take a seat on the back end of it and sit back and not let a project for a while? Because doing that, you get a better cost value of money when you let projects earlier in the UTP than later. So that's something we can look at pushing to. But just right now, to get through this exercise, they're not going to submit the STIP to the feds until we're fiscally constrained. And this is the direction we've been given to us, so we have to bump something out. Luckily, some of the other MPOs, I think Dallas and Houston MPOs, they're having to move over $1 billion out right now of Cat 2 funds. And with that many people that are involved in those MPOs, I'm sure that's not going to be a fun process, but that's something that they're going to have to go through also. So we're not in too bad a shape. As far as letting these projects, definitely, I think we can get at least one more, maybe both, within the next TIP cycle.
Thank you, Victor.
Are there any other questions or comments about this agenda item?
It's David Olson, City of Temple.
Yes.
Quick question. What was, has there been a good feedback process? And forgive me if I'm a little bit disconnected on this. What was the feedback process from your local governments? I know we've had a lot of planning that surrounded some of these projects moving on a certain timeline that we're doing locally as well. And I completely get something's got to bump. But I was just curious if there's been enough discussion around it to make those decisions.
Is that towards me, David? Is that the question for me?
Yeah, that's a question.
So I don't think there's been a whole lot of discussion on what moves or what's going to move it. It basically goes back to, like I talked about earlier, is when we had the UTP on a yearly allocation, you would pick projects based on their ranking and what available funds you had. So that's kind of what the decision was made. And both of these projects that we're pushing out beyond 2025, they're both TxDOT sponsored projects. So we felt comfortable doing that. Those were projects that we had sponsored and submitted for applications for. So I know it does impact the local governments in that, for instance, Temple's going to have to wait on those two overpasses. But again, we felt better, especially since it did rank out the way it did. We felt better pushing the TxDOT projects out and still letting the local government sponsored project that was ahead in line go ahead and move forward with that.
Yeah, and I'm with you there. I'm not saying that it's the wrong decision. I'm not quite there on a comfort level just yet, but that's probably more my own fault of not educating quick enough. So just seeking clarification.
Understood. Yeah, it's not fun for us either. It's it's been a chore, and it's not just the MPO stuff. There's some other funding categories that we had to go through and call out on our own. But yeah, it's hopefully we'll get better direction in the future, and we won't have to cross this type of bridge again. No pun intended.
Yep, I'm with you, and we're ready to help. Anything you need.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to recommend initiation of public involvement. I do have a motion. Is there a second? And a second. There's no further discussion. All those in favor say aye. And all those opposed? And that motion carries. Thank you, everyone. And we will move to agenda item 7, which is a discussion and action item. This is regarding category 7, excuse me, the category 7 match requirement and allocation for transit projects. Kendra?
Yes, sir. All of the categories are listed on the screen with their various purposes as well as their match requirements. Category 2 are used for only on-system roadway projects with a federal, state, or 100% state match. The Category 7 is an 80% federal with a local or state dollars depending on the system type. For off-system roadways, it is federal, local, and for on-system roadways, it is either federal, state, or federal, local. And with Category 9, it is a federal, local split. This is an item that we bring before the committee, before each round of funding, around each call for projects, so that we know how to spread that money out. And so today we are asking for a recommendation from the TAC to the policy board on how we would like to split that Category 7 share. And then on to the next item, and we can come back to both for questions and discussion. The next item also in this discussion is about the transit allocation, which also comes from Category 7 as well. On the screen, you can see the UTP funding amounts for the next 4 years for each of the categories. You can also see the 10% split that would be allocated to transit if this moves forward. This is a historical decision that the KTMPO typically allocates to transit for their bus replacement projects, leaving 90% of Category 7 for roadway and livability projects. So again, this decision is for both the match for Category 7 on state system projects, as well as the 10% reservation of Category 7 funds for transit.
I just, this is Kara from Nolanville. I have a point of clarification on this. For the TxDOT fees, are we going to also vote on whether those are going to be part of the 80-20 split instead of the way we had it before is the local entity had to pay all those TxDOT fees?
So the amounts that are awarded for projects are for construction dollars only.
Okay, but I think there's the ability to say whether we vote and determine whether we want the local entity to split, to have that as part of the fees that are in addition to the construction. And there's enough TxDOT people here as they could probably explain.
Victor, do you mind shedding light on that?
So what was the question again? I'm not real familiar with exactly how this process works on the fees. You're saying basically as the MPO, we can vote and say the allocated funds not only cover construction, but also cover TxDOT fees?
Right, the TxDOT fees. If I don't know if Erica is on here, but so when you go through your AFA, that's when you sort out like, okay, the TAC decided that these TxDOT fees are paid 100% by the local entity. So this is the time where we decide how that shakes out when we start doing our AFAs. Is it going to be part of the 80-20 split in its entirety, or are we paying the whole thing? And it can be substantial. So that's why I think we definitely need to consider.
Yeah, I think it is something that can be voted on. I know it was voted previously before my time in here, by when Michael was TP&D director. I guess they set it up the way it is now. Keep in mind, if it is voted that way, that's fewer projects that we get to select or fund. So that's just something to keep in mind also. I don't know if Erica, if you have some, or Brenton.
Can you all hear me? This is Erica.
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right. So yeah, what Kara was talking about was a direct state cost that are, normally the locals will pay an 80-20 split, and then they'll have to, in most cases, they've paid like 100% of the direct state cost. But we're, like she was saying, she just kind of wanted to know, I guess, if this is going to be figured in at the beginning. That way the locals have an idea of what they're going to be paying for all the direct state costs and TxDOT oversight throughout the project, because with it only covering the construction portion of the project, there's still direct state costs for the engineering portion of the project. So instead of the state or the local paying 20%, they're having to pay 100% of the direct state cost with these projects. Did you have anything else, Kara?
No, I was just trying to shed light on it because it can, in some cases we're already paying the preliminary engineering ahead of the project as it is. And then we have to go on top of being prepared to pay for those direct costs, which we don't have any idea of until we get to the AFA. So it's just hard to budget around that.
Yes,
Hey, Kara, is this something, as opposed to is not directly on the agenda, I know it relates to this. Is this something we can bring to another meeting? I'm not going to lie. I don't think I'm familiar enough with the process, only being here a couple of years. I'd like to delve a little bit further into this with staff and TxDOT and have some more conversations so that, we can move forward with this. Is that something you would like to see on maybe a future agenda?
I don't mind it being a future agenda, but this is normally when we would talk about is when we're considering how we're going to divvy this percentage up. So I think you maybe table the whole thing until you can make a decision on the whole and then figure out what the impact is as a whole.
Okay, so your recommendation would be to table the whole agenda item until we can delve back into the TxDOT fees.
Yeah, consider that part, consider, preliminary engineering, the whole thing instead of just this one part of it.
Okay. Is there any opposition to us tabling this item and bringing it back to the TAC on a future agenda?
This is Victor. I would feel more comfortable. I'm not prepared to discuss it today. I wouldn't, ready for it. I would feel better if we could, talk about it later on after we've had some time to dig in and look into it a little bit more, if that doesn't hurt the schedule anyway.
And just so I'm sure, Kendra, in the big schedule that we have, tabling this until maybe next month doesn't disrupt any of our planning activities, correct?
Not necessarily. The only item that it directly affected as far as the October meeting was the transit allocation. If we want to consider that item or table the entire item together. And that
I
was
think the way the
project.
agenda items is written, we will actually have to table both. But the reason for it was because of the call for projects and when it closes. So Hill Country could determine whether or not they should submit their application for a project, correct?
That is right.
Okay. So, and I'm not, it would be my recommendation to table the entire item until we can have further discussion and bring it back at maybe the next meeting. Is there any opposition to that? Seeing none, we will table item 7 until the next TAC meeting. With that, we will move to, for those of you who may not have been on the call earlier, we were waiting for a quorum, so we already did have the presentation from TxDOT on the pilot travel surveys, which is agenda item 8. So we will move to agenda item 9, which is a discussion item. We have representatives from TxDOT on the line to provide an update on the traffic safety management operations. And I will transfer it over to TxDOT.
Good morning. This is Tom Feller. I'm with Kimley Horn and Associates. Kimley Horn is under contract to the Texas Department of Transportation Waco District, and they have asked that I make this presentation this morning. Joining on the line is Chris Pruitt with the TxDOT Waco District, and Chris is our project manager. And Chris and I would be happy to answer questions on this effort. I'm going to touch on this at a very high level. But please don't hesitate to reach out to either of us if anyone would like to talk about this effort in more detail. TxDOT has placed a high priority on focusing on operations. We've made a lot of investments in building the transportation system, but there's been a greater focus over the last few years on operating the system. Across the state, TxDOT districts are developing these traffic transportation system management and operations program plans, including in the Waco district, and we are getting close to wrapping up our plan here. So we wanted to give an update of what's in the plan and give an opportunity for additional involvement. And we can go to the next slide, please. Actually, move on to the next. Let's go one more down just to keep things moving. There we go. So at a high level, the purpose of the TSMO program plan is to look at how we're doing operations in the district with the aim of trying to focus on short-term improvements. We are generally looking at things we can do over the next 5 years, generally low-cost activities, whether it's a change in staffing, it's a change in business processes, maybe it is involving some infrastructure deployments, but looking for ways to improve operations and make the roads and transportation system more reliable, reduce congestion, and improve safety. Next slide, please. When we do the TSMO program plans, we look at a number of different areas. So thinking about things like travel information, how we deal with traffic signal coordination, work zone management. And what we find is in any district we're looking at, some things really rise to the top of there's a lot of opportunities for improvement, and some things tend to fall to the wayside, whether it's maybe road weather management isn't so much of an issue in a district, or maybe we're doing planned special events really well and there's not as much opportunity for improvement there, so we tend to focus less on those areas. Next slide, please. Within each of those areas, so within the Waco district, and we'll talk about this in a second, but we're focusing primarily on things like traffic signal management, incident management, construction, work zone management. We look at each of those from a couple of different angles. We think about the business processes. So if we're talking about incident management, do we have the right kind of towing contracts? Do we need to put performance-based criteria in there? We look at systems and technology. Do we have cameras to identify where crashes may occur and make sure we get the right responders out there? We try to identify if we have the right performance measures to track how we're doing, things like our organization and workforce, and how well we're working with partners. While this focus of this plan is really on what TxDOT can do to improve operations, a key part of that is how TxDOT works with its partners. And so we've had a lot of outreach to the various agencies in the KT-MPO area, as well as within the Waco MPO area. And we appreciate all of that input. Next slide, please. So why the focus on TSMO, or really, the focus on operations? A key part of it has been congestion. What we find is typically in any area, about 40% of congestion deals with bottlenecks, just the lack of capacity. When we see the continued backup, say during rush hour, but about 60% of that deals with these other areas, things like traffic incidents, poor weather, work zone management. That percentage of things in yellow on the right there tends to go up in more rural areas where most of their congestion deals with incidents or work zones going on. And through this improved operations, we think we can focus very much on what's on the right side there. Next slide, please. A second driver of this focus on operations that TxDOT's investing in is regarding safety. TxDOT has their Road to Zero program with the goal of reducing, actually eliminating fatal crashes by the year 2050, and the goal to cut fatal crashes by half by the year 2035. So this focus on operations, better managing incidents, alerting the public when we have an unexpected road closure or debris in the roadway, dealing with construction work zones and letting people know what to expect, and better managing traffic through there are all things that are seen as ways to improve safety and help TxDOT meet that Road to Zero goal. Next slide, please. And then just in general, we know there's a change in the transportation environment. There's a greater focus on information and technology, an expectation from the public to have more accurate information, to have a more reliable system. And through the use of improved operations, we think we can support that and make the traveling experience better for travelers across the state. Next slide, please. And so the TSMO, the plan that we're putting together, we try to make a business case for operations, looking at a cost-benefit analysis of implementing some of these different operational strategies within the Waco district. Try to identify where we are and where we want to be. I mentioned earlier, the key focus is on the next 5 years, and that was what we wanted to touch on today, is some of those recommendations that we're looking at. And we also are looking at some institutional changes, whether it's the business processes or performance measures that are used to track operations, or potential additional staffing needs within TxDOT to better support operations. Those are the things we touch on. Next slide. As we've done this, we've focused a lot on outreach. It's not on here, but starting in January, we conducted meetings. One was held at the KTMPO office in Belton, and invited stakeholders from down in the Killeen-Temple area. We had a second one up in Waco. And then we've had a series of one-on-one agency meetings. We've had workshops focused on the strengths and needs within the district, and then one focused on some action items and solutions. Narrowed those focuses down to things like traffic signal management and incident management, and some of the areas that stakeholders wanted to focus the most on. This month, we're working on our draft plan, and so we should have that out later this month, and wanted to share that with all of the stakeholders for input, and we're looking to finalize that before the end of the year. Next slide. So the primary thing we wanted to do today is just touch on some of these recommended areas, and I'll hit these quickly. We only pulled a few, but the 6 areas that we're focusing the most on are listed here. This is where we saw the greatest opportunity for our improvement in operations, improvement in safety, reduction in congestion within the TxDOT Waco district. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll touch on each of these very quickly. And as I said in the report, we go into these in much more detail, and it's more extensive, but we're happy to discuss them. So these are the other key note here is these are draft recommended action items. These have not been fully vetted by TxDOT, so we are still working with TxDOT to decide if these are appropriate. But some of the ones we felt like were most important that we wanted to mention today. When it comes to incident management, we did want to look at establishing a safety service patrol. If you're familiar with down in Austin, the HERO patrol, which helps manage traffic at incidents, helps move, they can move debris out of the road. They can support a driver who has a flat tire and help them quickly change that, and basically just clear the roads faster. So we've talked about that for I-35 and I-14. We talked about establishing a regional TIM group, maybe in the Killeen-Temple area, and a separate one in Waco. That involves police, fire, EMS, traffic operators, and perhaps towing to review incidents on a regular basis and talk about what we can do to improve incident management. And there's been a lot of discussion about improving incident management during construction events. This was a particular concern in the Waco area, where we've got long stretches of I-35 with no access for emergency management when there's an incident. So talking about things to to set up future construction contracts where maybe we require on-site towing, or that the contractor have the ability to remove barriers. So if police or fire need to get to an incident scene, they can do so much quicker than maybe having to try to, in some cases, they've had to walk onto the freeway to access a crash. Obviously not the ideal situation. Next slide, please. When it comes to traffic signal management, we've talked about the need to continue to focus on countermeasures, safety countermeasures when installing upgrades, things like the ability to detect malfunctions with signals, to have alerts so we can quickly get out technicians if there's a flashing red. A lot of discussion about the need for improved training throughout the district, so we have a consistent level of technical capability with all technicians, and TxDOT has talked about trying to provide that additional training to support cities as well as their own staff. And then a discussion on having a quarterly signal technician forum, just again to share best practices and keep everyone up to speed. Next slide. Work zone management. We want to try to do a better job evaluating how we're doing with work zones, particularly when we have full freeway closures, to measure the amount of delay and see if we can improve that. And that's particularly important for ongoing type closures where we have the opportunity to see if we can do better in terms of diverting traffic, providing advanced warning to people so they know a road's going to be closed. I also talked about multidisciplinary post-construction event reviews, again, getting the people involved in these major freeway closures together to see what we can do better. Next slide. Plan special events. Again, needing to understand the impact of major special events and getting groups together afterwards to talk about how we can improve those operations. We think generally what we've seen with special events, the major ones have went very well. It's been some of the smaller events that people have mentioned, we saw a fairly large impact on traffic. Next slide. And just, I think, two other areas, road weather management. We want to improve communication to local partners. Some of the cities especially had talked about the need to know when TxDOT's going to get out and do maintenance on the roads during severe weather, sort of anti-icing or plowing if there is a snowstorm. And then also the need to try to identify where we have low water crossings or flooding frequently on FM and RM roads. Getting technology out there and managing those. And I think our last recommendation on the next slide, just in terms of general traffic management, we have been discussing the idea of a regional traffic management center for TxDOT that could either be at the district office, or we've been discussing with the city of Waco about a joint TMC. The idea would be Waco had some additional space at one of their 911 dispatching facilities, so we could potentially co-locate with them. And even though that TMC might be located in Waco, the idea is for TxDOT to start to staff that at least during business hours and be able to manage the freeways and operate them a little bit more actively on I-14, I-35 through the Killeen-Temple area and try to support things like better incident management, traffic signal management, deal with construction, maybe activate that during major construction closures so we can monitor those throughout the night. Also talked about regional traffic operations forums to continue to get the people that have been involved in this plan, the traffic engineers throughout the district, to continually meet. Maybe it's every 6 months or so and talk about operations and what's going well and what we need to continue to focus on. And lastly, we talked about just the need to continue to deploy additional infrastructure to support these other operations. Next slide. And I apologize, that was a very quick overview, just hitting on a couple of the key things. We are planning to share these over the next few weeks with our stakeholder group and ask for additional review and comment. And as I said, we plan to then start to roll out the plan and share that with everyone in November once everyone that's been involved so far has had a chance to review. And our last slide just included contact information for Chris from the Waco district, as well as myself and Dale Malson, who's supporting on this project. TxDOT does have a general web page that focuses on sort of all their TISMO activities with a lot more information about what's going on across the state. And the hope is within the Waco district, we can implement some of these strategies and recommendations to improve operations, that would support both freeway, state routes, and the way operations work through cities. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity for a brief update, and I think Chris and I would be happy to answer if there's any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for TxDOT? Seeing none, I apologize, everybody, but it appears that the method I used to table agenda item 7 wasn't in the proper order. So I'd like to return to item number 7 so that we can have a motion and a vote for the Category 7 match requirement and allocation of transit projects. The motion what I originally did was just pulled it and tabled it. So my apologies for that, but at this point, I will entertain a motion on that agenda item. I have a motion to table and a second. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? Thank you, everyone. And thank you for bearing with me through that. With that, we will move to agenda item 10, which is a discussion item. We have representatives from ATG. They're going to present on the environmental justice and study update. Excuse me. With that, I will hand it over to ATG.
Thank you, Urian. This is Jim Harvey with ATG. And we're currently helping the KTMPO do an update to its environmental justice analysis. So essentially, what exactly is an environmental justice analysis is one of the things we'll be covering. We'll also talk to you about the tools and the methods that we're using to do the work. The identification of the EJ areas in the region, and with how we're assessing project impacts, and then we'll take questions if you have any. So the Environmental Justice Program is a fairly mature program. It's been around for over 20 years, and it started with a presidential executive order that was designed to implement elements of the Title VI Civil Rights Act. And essentially what that executive order said was that federal programs could not expend money on projects that had a disproportionate burden on populations of low-income or minority residents. So it's essentially about social equity in the federal program. And that, of course, carries over to what's happening with the transportation program that the MPO administers. So there are essentially 3 fundamental principles in environmental justice, and that's to avoid, minimize, or mitigate the disproportionate impacts on the identified environmental justice community, to ensure a full and fair participation by potentially affected communities in the decision-making process. That's why there's so much emphasis in the MTP and TIP processes on public participation. And then to prevent the denial or reduction or delay of benefits to minority and low-income populations. So not only do we want to try and avoid having negative impacts directly, but we want to also try and avoid delaying the benefits that could accrue through the planning process. Your Honor, or Kendra, I think we need to go to the next page. Maybe not. I think we're still there. So the most recent guidance to MPOs from USDOT is that MPOs should enhance their analytical capabilities. So this is one of the factors that's encouraging performance-based planning and doing objective measurement of things so that we understand what the impacts might be on a community. A lot of emphasis on identifying residential, employment, and transportation patterns of low income and minority populations in the region to understand their needs and how they can best be addressed. To evaluate and, where necessary, improve the MPO's public involvement process. You voted on a lot of your policies and criteria for environmental justice program for the KTMPO. And if you'll remember, that was all done as part of your public participation process. So there's a lot of emphasis on this engagement aspect of the process. And then, of course, design transportation facilities that fit more harmoniously into communities. And so that's why you're seeing so much more emphasis on context-sensitive design and complete streets and other programs that completely that provide a complete focus on all of the modes and how all communities in the region travel. So how do we go about doing this analysis? Well, there are tools available. Our major data source is the American Community Survey 5-year data sample. It provides block group information on households in the region so that we can understand which households meet the criteria. There are also GIS analytical tools. EPA has sponsored a tool called EJ Viewer that helps you to analyze the survey data and your demographics in the region. And then we use tools such as ArcGIS Community Analyst and Arc Model Builder to create logic programs that help us extract that information. Now we need to go to the next page so that we can so in the identification of the EJ areas, what we did was we worked with the MPO staff and extracted the information from the community survey. And the map you see shown there in the upper left-hand corner of the panel is the areas that were identified as falling within the criteria identified by the MPO. 85th percentile of regional income index, 50% or more of the population identifies as minority, and then 35% or more of persons of Hispanic or Latino descent. If you go to the next slide, please, that'd be great. Okay, so the next step in the process was to take the MTP projects and overlay those projects on the environmental justice zones. And as you can see, this is all based on the geography of the travel demand model. But as you can see, there are a number of projects that intersect with the environmental justice areas. And we'll be analyzing those projects to see how they are actually providing service to those areas to understand whether there are any negative impacts or whether there are any positive impacts, because the projects may be actually supporting the travel needs of those communities. Next slide. So what we're looking at in the project review process is, first off, is the project in an environmental justice area? Was the project developed in collaboration with that community? Does the project add capacity or expand right away? Because we need to look, as with all projects, we need to look and see if there's any potential impacts on adjacent property owners or how we're interacting with the land use around the facility. Now, just because you need right of way does not necessarily mean that the project is violating any environmental justice principles. We also have to look at how the improvement supports the environmental justice area travel patterns, because remember, the environmental justice program is about proportionate benefit or impact. So just as with the larger regional community, sometimes in order to provide benefit to a community, there are some incidental, hopefully, impacts that have to be addressed, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're disproportionate or detrimental. So essentially, if the project is designed to support that EJ area's travel, then it's going to also receive some attention for that in your scoring process as you go along. And one of the things that we'll be looking at is, does the project add amenities or livability elements that directly serve the EJ area? So a good example is if you have a project out of your livability track that's putting in sidewalks or bike facilities or otherwise putting in amenities that make it easier to move around that environmental justice area, help the community cohesiveness, that project's actually going to get a positive review for its environmental justice benefits, even though it's physically present in the area. So that's the basic concept of the analysis. As you might imagine, some of these questions need feedback from stakeholders to help us to identify some of the answers. And what we'll be doing, the MPO will probably be reaching out to you in the near future. We're going to start with planning partners and trying to identify individuals who'd like to participate with us in this process, or at least help us identify someone that can help us to answer some of these questions on projects. So we'll do an initial profile on the projects. In fact, we've already started to do an initial profile on the projects and what the general analysis reveals, and then we'll come back to whoever you identify as the stakeholders we should be talking to verify that we've interpreted it correctly and talk about how that project is actually interacting with the community around us along the length of the project. And that's a quick rundown on the analysis. We'll probably be back to talk to you about the results in the not too distant future, but if you have any questions, I'll be glad to take those at this point. Thank you.
This is Justin Morgan from Federal Highway Administration.
Sure.
Where is the EJ viewer tool found?
It's an EPA product, and so I think I can send you a link if you'd like.
Okay.
Okay. I'll make sure I think I've got your email address, but I'll verify it. I'll send it to you through the MPO so everybody's in the loop.
Great.
But it's an EPA product, and it lets you it lets you customize the criteria you're using to look at the areas, and it's just one tool. I mean, you also have to go in and look at the American Community Survey directly in some cases, because it doesn't give the EJ viewer doesn't give you the ability to do every one of the criteria necessarily that the MPO wanted to look at, but it's a helpful tool, and we'll be training the MPO on how to use that so they can use it as a quick check as they go through maybe amendments to the plan in the future as the planning process progresses through the usual maturing of the plan and the TIP. So, any other questions?
I'm not seeing any. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
And with no other questions, we will move into agenda item 11, which is a discussion item. Representatives from CDM Smith are going to provide an update on the freight and MTP evaluation studies. And I will transfer it over to CDM Smith.
All right, Kendrick, since we're running short of time, could you just go down to slide number 4, please? We'll just skip right to that. Okay, this is 2 projects. The first one is the freight truck parking study. And in order to do it, we're using an FHWA truck parking model, which requires some specific information on all of our sites. We developed 39 sites as opposed to the statewide study, which had 5. And then we gathered the information on location, the amenities, and the utilization. And if you go down to slide number 6, please. Yeah, and this is what the model basically showed. We have conditions for 2018 and for 2045. You can see the purple lines there is the truck corridors. And so by corridor, we got the supply and demand and the shortfall in truck parking spaces for long-term and for short-term parking. If you look at that first table, is 2018, you can see the rows is I-35 and other in total. It shows that I-35 has the greatest amount of need and the greatest amount of shortfall. You can see also that the overnight parking is where the shortfall is. For the short-term parking, we actually have a surplus. We've got enough. The next table down is 2045, and it shows the same thing. Most of the need, most of the shortfall is along the I-35 corridor, and it's all for overnight parking for the long term. So that'll guide the next step of the process, which is we identify potential sites, the locations, and the amenities. And then if you go down, slide number 9, the last one. This is for the historic MTP projects, and what we've done is parse the list of projects down to the ones that are appropriate for objective scoring. We made a dashboard for each of these, and what we've got there at the top left is a location map in the region, and then the next one on the top row is just the key information to describe the project. The top right shows the different networks like the strategic highway network, the truck priority network, and things, whether this particular project lies within it. The larger map, you can see with the green line, that locates the project at a closer scale so you can see it. And then we have the before and after cross section. And then the charts on the bottom, for regional context, we're showing the population of the area. So you see the population is growing. The next one, the green line, is the actual traffic. And then the red line is just the trend line. So you can see the traffic is growing slowly. It has a dip during the construction phase and then the rapid recovery. And the next one is the crash data. We have the red lines for fatalities and the orange lines for serious injuries. And with this information, when we put this all together as part of performance management, we'll be looking at what type of information this tells us. Is the project that you've already completed, has it been effective, and in what areas has been effective? Going forward, we'll do that for all the categories, and then we'll also look at what data needs we have, what the data tells us, what data we're going to need in the future, and then also, are we measuring the right things? Okay, and hopefully that was quick enough, and if there's any questions, I'll be glad to take them.
Are there any questions for Charlie? I'm not seeing or hearing any. Thank you, sir, for your presentation and update. And with that, we will move to agenda item 12, which is a discussion item regarding public input received through September 2020. Kendra?
Thank you, Ryan. We have not received any new public comments through September.
Thank you. And moving right along to agenda item 13, are there any member comments? I'm not seeing or hearing any member comments. With that, we will move to agenda item 14 and adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everybody. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, guys.